So we're going to start with simply defining what is psychological safety.
Yeah, so I just want to start with a definition to kind of give us a place to start with, and then we'll begin to kind of unpack this definition, how it relates to you in just a little bit. Um, Psychological safety is the belief that you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. Especially at work, it's a shared expectation held by members of a team that teammates will not embarrass, reject, or punish them for sharing ideas, taking risks, or soliciting feedback. Um, we share this definition in part to kind of begin to, I guess, expand and trouble the idea of safety. I think a lot of underpinning of um, anti-oppression work or DEI work or social justice work really hinges on this idea of safety. And a lot of the work that Tyneshia and I do is related to well-being. So we want to kind of tie some of these threads together around what do we mean when we say safety? What does safety look like? Is safety possible? Where does safety happen? Where does safety become really complicated? Um, I want to also give an example just to kind of unpack what this might mean for us. Um, we might think about an example when I go into meetings, especially since working at the Resilience Lab. I feel like I've been in a workspace that's focused on well-being. And so it's been really interesting to see how well-being shows up in our interpersonal interactions, not just in the presentations that we do to departments or the offerings that we have. Um, I noticed when I go into meetings with my supervisor, I don't feel any pressure to prepare anything. There's a big focus on, we often say, less prep, more presence. And I notice when I have less of that expectation to go in with having to be prepared, I feel less stressed. I have more time. I'm able to be genuine. I'm able to trust that um, my supervisor trusts my intelligence, trusts my knowledge. And I also trust that I'm going to be seen and understood for where I'm at in my process. Um, this sort of model also allows people to engage in all the different ways that work for them and allows us to be more productive. Effectively, this small example of being able to go into a meeting without having to feel prepared or having to feel like I have a script ready, or having to defend myself in some way, um, for me is an example of what psychological safety can look like. That doesn't mean that hard things don't happen, but it means I go in with a very different mindset, and my nervous system shows up in a very different way than when I'm having to come in with armor. So we want to give you all a chance to kind of explore this in terms of how you experience this. And so I'll pass it off to Tyneshia and share my sides again.
So it's really important when we're doing this work that remember, I'm going to say this a lot throughout this presentation, that it's not one size fits all. However, there are a lot of pressures in society that make us feel like we need to be in the norm. We need to be doing things a certain way. So to kind of combat that, we're going to invite you all to do this kind of writing prompt with us. So you're not going to share these with the group. You don't get to turn them in. But if you could find a pen and paper or use a doc. And then if those are not accessible to you, you can think these things through. But I'm going to walk us through a couple prompts to kind of get you thinking about what does psychological safety look like for you specifically and in your workplace, in your work environment. So the first prompt, actually, I'll give you a second, grab a pen and paper if possible. And as you're writing things down, it doesn't need to be full sentences. It can be words, it could be like crossword style, like whatever works for you. So the first prompt is, you're going into your next work meeting, write down what you need from others and from yourself to feel psychologically safe in this meeting. And remember, I just dropped the definition in the chat. So give you about 3 to 4 minutes to write what you think around this prompt. All right, a couple things to reflect on as you're writing out your thoughts. on that prompt is this the first time you've ever been asked this question? Is it the first time you've ever thought about safety in a psychological form versus a physical? Was it hard to write out that answer? Did something immediately come to mind where you might have felt safe or unsafe? So just a couple things to reflect on. So the next prompt is a thinking prompt. So you don't have to write anything down, but feel free to. Think of a moment when your safety was compromised. Knowing what you know now from the last 15 minutes, what action would have supported you in rebuilding a psychologically safe environment? So this just kind of acknowledges that when you feel compromised in your safety, it's not something that you instantly regain because you've done a little bit of work. There has to be a rebuilding of things because when psychological safety is compromised, it also can compromise the dynamic of the relationship, maybe with your manager, your coworkers, and it can also compromise the physical space you're in. So maybe a meeting room has kind of bad connotation now when you think about it. So just think of a moment when you felt that your safety was compromised. Knowing what you know now, how are you going to kind of rebuild that safety net? To give you about 2 minutes to think through that. All right, and the last prompt, which is a writing prompt. Back to that. So write down the name of a person, place, or community that you trust to make you feel safe. Think about the qualities of this person or place that makes you feel safe. So simply writing down the name of person, place, or community that you trust to make you feel psychologically safe. So the last bit of this exercise is one, just to remember that there are places that feel safe, people that feel safe, communities that we can retreat to and feel resourced by. But it's also important to remember that that we can have agency. So I just want to shout Sasha out. Sasha brought up agency today, and literally this entire bit will be from Sasha just saying like one wonderful thing from me to me earlier. But I feel like resilience isn't my favorite word this year. It feels very like glorified that we need to be resilient or we should constantly be resilient. And it's like, I would like to rest this year. I would like to stop being so resilient. So in that vein, I would like to have more agency and I would like to understand myself better and how can I promote agency? How can I build paths to where I don't need to grow or protect myself or wear resilient armor all the time? And I think thinking about your communities and what supports you and what makes you feel safe and kind of leaning into that is going to be really helpful. So we'll talk more about action at the end. Um, so now we want to do a share out. You've done all this writing and thinking. The question for you, which you can put your answer in the chat or feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you since there's so many people. But what have you learned about yourself and your ideas around safety in the workplace? Sorry, a little typo there, but what are you thinking? How's this going? Have you learned anything new?
Tyneshia, I can go if you're okay with that. I think the important thing that I heard when you said that you're tired of being resilient is understanding that emotional safety and the needs can change from day to day, that they're not a defined need every particular day. So if I tell someone today I need space or something else like that, today I need to be left alone, today I need X, Y, and Z, the understanding that I have the agency to be able to change that decision based on the changes around me as well.
Thank you. I love that. Again, this ties so well into like safety. Psychological safety isn't one size fits all. And we're going to talk about action plan a little bit and how that's not one size fits all, because not only are we all completely different based off our experiences, our work environments, our managers, all these things, but like literally I'm a little different every day and what I need is different every day. And that's okay. And something I'm trying to accept is like I might be different moment to moment and that's fine. We have so many wonderful things in the chat. I'm gonna randomly go through and call out some of these things. But I've learned that expectations Such what's expected of me is key to my sense of safety, right? For that, like, there are so many external things that are expected of us. There's an entire like UW culture, let alone whatever culture we come from and what we're building. And I feel like there's a lot of expectations, and simply pausing and assessing, which we'll talk more about, is going to be key in how we can build safety. Um, Acknowledging that you might have felt safe in the workplace and that can go, it can be compromised, but we could try to find our way back to that. Sasha, do you have any thoughts around this?
Yeah, someone said in the chat, this helped me think more about my allies in the workplace and who I rely on versus those that make me feel anxious. I think, yeah, a lot of this is about checking in with ourselves and kind of noticing what's working for us. I think especially in this current political moment, I think there's a lot that's needed of us, a lot that's expected of us. And in a lot of ways, I feel grateful for the timing of this presentation, just in the sense of, um, yeah, like there's a lot of external focus right now. And often when there is an external focus, that internal focus gets compromised and we have a lot less bandwidth for that. And so being able to check in with ourselves about how we're changing day to day, what we're needing, what does it take to communicate that? If we're not able to communicate that, why? Often there's some really valid reasons why we can't communicate that, whether that's past experiences or whether it's um, a sense of it feels like it's not going to be understood on the other end. I think all of those pieces are worth exploring and just require us to slow down a little bit.
Did anyone else want to unmute and share anything? Oh. All right, we have one more share out question for you.
Yeah, in the spirit of kind of acknowledging those folks um who help us establish safety or help us feel grounded in a sense of safety, we just want to bring into the space and really offer gratitude to those people. So if you feel comfortable in the chat, we'd love for folks to share the name of a person or a community or a place that makes you feel safe. Yeah, this is just an opportunity for us to offer gratitude and to also remind ourselves that when we are in a moment of um, a lack of safety or in a moment of distress, that we have these people. And I just want to like acknowledge, like, if it was hard for you to identify who those people were, that's totally okay. I think especially in our kind of hybrid world, it may be hard to identify and to build these relationships with people. That person may be like your cat at home right now, and that's okay. I think even being able to acknowledge that we all need and deserve to have somebody who makes us feel safe in that way, is a step in a direction toward cultivating safety. It's also okay if you don't feel comfortable sharing. Maybe just take a moment internally to acknowledge these people or these communities. I think this is also just a reminder that in the midst of all of the work that we do, especially the DEIB work that we do, we can feel complicated about humanity. We can feel complicated or hopeless, or we can feel like, who is in my corner? We're often the people in other people's corners, being support in whatever way. Um, and so reminding ourselves that we've got someone, whether that someone is more than human, whether that someone is related to you, whether that person is part of your chosen family, that there are folks in our corner. With that, I want to add a couple of notes and then I'll pass it off to Tyneshia to get to what I think of as the thing that everybody came here to hear about, the action piece. But I want to acknowledge that there are few spaces where psychological safety is guaranteed. I work at the Resilience Lab part-time and I'm a therapist part-time. And even in therapy spaces, psychological safety isn't guaranteed. And that doesn't mean that every space we walk into or every space we engage with is inherently harmful or dangerous. But it means that we're going to experience safety and harm in degrees and in gradients. And being able to discern where we are within those degrees and within those gradients really helps us be strategic about our energy, strategic about how we want to resource ourselves, strategic about how we want to navigate things in the future. And so I think this acknowledgement is important because it means that we don't always have to go in fully armored up. It means there are moments where we can go in maybe with an armor that's more like a fuzzy sweater. And that can mean that like there's less strain on our body, there's less strain on our nervous system. And I just want to name that like to me, a lot of establishing psychological safety is also about learning to trust ourselves and establishing safety with ourselves. Like if there's a gut feeling that's saying like this conversation doesn't feel good to me, like really trusting that, even when we may have things kind of overriding it, like, well, this is your supervisor, or this is someone you're supposed to respect, or this is the role you're in, so this is just how it's supposed to be. Really trusting that gut feeling, I think, helps us establish that safety. And I think it's through that gut feeling and through that self-trust that we can really show up with action that actually feels sustainable for us. So I'm gonna pass it off to Tyneshia to talk a little bit more about action.
Yeah. And thank you for putting all that stuff in the chat. It feels like really warm to read through that. And again, I just love taking a moment to give gratitude and to bring like somebody to your mind and like bring them to this space. Um, Shout out to all the cats. So this leads us to talking about action. We all want answers. We all want a mapped out action plan. The more linear, the better. But unfortunately, since we all are not one size fits all, action is just, it's hard. So it's something, again, we need to work through, we need to journal through, we need to think through and assess what we're needing and how can we move forward, especially when there's a lot of internal and external pressures around us, especially on campus. So this can look like people expecting you to speak up or call out on others in meetings. Action expectations can be, are you donating to specific organizations? How many committees are you on across campus? What certificates do you have? What degrees do you have? For me, as a person of color, I'm often expected to be on DEIB committees. I'm expected to lead this work without payment. So there's just a lot of things that come to us and are forced upon us, and then things that we've just grown up with that we need to kind of acknowledge that they're there and then move away from them. So our little action plan that we came up with starts with assessment, pausing to acknowledge that something is needed. In the B-Roll program, they call it name it to tame it or radical acceptance. So this doesn't mean that you're happy with what's going on. It just means that you acknowledge something's happening, an action is needed. This is where we're at right now. So kind of assessing where you're at, taking the pause, naming it to tame it, and then start to information gather. So you can think about, what does resource look like for me? So earlier when you're doing that journal prompt, that's kind of information gathering. You're pausing to think about like, I'm really burnt out. What would really help me is I need to watch Love is Blind tonight. Just pausing and accepting something needs to change. Then you can kind of move to resourcing yourself, and thinking about resourcing, I think, feels intimidating, but resources can really be whatever you need them to be. So taking a nap, setting a boundary, reading a Reddit thread, saying no to somebody. You had said yes to somebody and going back and saying no, even though you had said yes. Educating yourself, reaching out to a friend for a vent, for a soundboard. If you need to cry, take that cry later, take it right now. So much Googling. I'm constantly Googling things to understand what's going on in this world, or backtracking. So needing a resource shouldn't feel shameful. There shouldn't be judgment around it. And it can literally be anything. So once you assess you need something, you've established what you need and what could help you move forward, and then tending to that idea. So just one of my favorite analogies, talking about gardens. So you've identified that you want your garden to grow, you've gotten the tools, you've bought the seeds, you have everything going, and now you need to upkeep this garden. So to be human is to be seasonal. We're constantly changing, we are fluid, everything around us is changing. So we definitely need to keep ourselves up. We need to tend to ourselves and what's going on. And we'll constantly need support and growth. We constantly need water and sunlight, and that's okay. And then just do this on repeat. So, like we said earlier, DIB work and life in general is just ongoing, it's constant, we're changing. So, stop again, assess again, find a new resource, and we're going to do this for forever, hopefully. So, I think this is a very simple action plan. It requires a lot of self-work, a lot of tuning into yourself. But it's definitely worth trying and maybe starting with something simple. You know, if something sticks out in your mind from the journal prompt earlier, or we're talking through something now and you had an uncomfortable feeling in a meeting, it's worth sitting down with yourself and writing some things out, thinking some things through. Sasha, anything to add?
I think, even folks showing up here for this presentation today is, to me, a moment of like taking time out for yourself. And I hope you all can offer yourselves a little bit of gratitude for taking this time to do this kind of reflecting. Um, yeah, I think this work isn't easy. I think especially the assessing part is not easy. That to me, that's the hardest part. Being able to slow things down, being able to check in and not have those layers of judgment or pushback, well, or like that sense of, I wish I could just do this on my own, or I wish I could just like have this be this other way. Um, and so, yeah, being really gentle with yourself as you're kind of figuring out what does that process look like for you. I do this work because I suck at this work and I need a little bit of structure. And so to me, you all are kind of a resource to me in the sense that whenever I get to be up in front of people and doing this, I'm like, I got to get my shit together. All of these people are looking at me, kind of thing. And so I think there are ways that I kind of almost sneakily assess myself or sneakily resource myself. So even though this work is hard, it can be playful too.
Oh, so surprisingly, we got through all of our content. We would love to chat more about what you think around psychological safety, how you're feeling about that like action plan,